That said, hi everyone and welcome. Thank you for coming to our debate series forum on mental health. Tonight's question that we're going to be asking is whether Generation Z is the first generation to get mental health right. For those of you who are confused about what that question even means and how it is that you could even begin answering it, I promise you we're going to spend a lot of time trying to clarify it as much as possible as the night goes on. One of the ways that we're going to do that is that we have an excellent opening guest speaker today, Dr. Amanda Tashjian, who's going to help to clarify some of that. So we'll have an opening speaker, a little bit of a conversation so you can get a fair idea of what we're talking about. Afterwards, we're going to open up our conversation with our debaters who will be arguing either yes or no to that question tonight. You get to vote both before and after, and the style of this debate is called Oxford, where the debater's job is to persuade you the most, which means we're going to see who changes the audience's mind the most from the beginning to the end. I'll talk to you about how the voting system works after we're done talking. But first, please welcome our opening guest speaker, Dr. Amanda Tashjian. We'll fix that in post, as they say. Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming to join us. So can you tell us what your role is here at the university before we get started?
Sure. So I am an associate professor of practice and the director of the Master's in Counseling program in the College of Education.
So you work with Generation Z and sort of younger millennials all the time right now, right?
I do. I have all grad students. Most of them are, Gen Z. They're young, 21, 22, 23.
So obviously what you're seeing is people who are that age who are training to be counselors. So I want to talk about sort of what concerns they're running into and that they're bringing to you first before we start talking about sort of where it is that we see Generation Z on a client level. So what are you seeing in terms of the people who are getting trained, who are members of the generation, who want to become why do they want to become therapists? What does it mean to them?
I think a lot of my students come to our program and want to be counselors because they've had their own mental health journey and experience. So they've been impacted by a professional who was fantastic, or maybe they've had life experience that wasn't so fantastic. That shaped their educational journey, and really many people default to, I want to help people because I had this experience. Or we have other students who are just generally curious about the human condition. Why are people the way they are, and how can we help people be the people that they want to be? And I would say those are usually the two major groups of students, in terms of their drive and motivation to be a counselor. I think that's where they fall. I'm helping because I experienced, or I'm helping because I'm curious.
And do you find that there's a shift or a distinct difference between kind of the pool of students now versus when you yourself were in graduate school, and sort of what the desire was back then?
I had a feeling that question might come up. I think it's different. I think that most of my peers when I was in grad school, we were more curious about why are people the way they are. What makes somebody tick? How do you help somebody when things are not great? But it was really more curiosity. Of course, we all have life experiences that shape us, and so there was definitely that too. But it wasn't so much we had an experience with depression or anxiety or a family systems issue, and this experience shaped our interest in being a therapist. I think, if I'm being candid, which I will be.
Please.
I think most graduate students, most people, especially students straight out of undergrad who enter a counseling program, don't actually know very well what it's like to be on the counseling side of it. They don't recognize how challenging it is to sit with people's, what I call, and I have some former students here, so they've heard me say this, deep, dark, dirty secrets. Yeah. That is a privilege, but it is a difficult place to be. And I don't know that students totally get that when they apply to a graduate program and they're just starting, and they learn that pretty quickly.
And do you think that is, so in other words, it sounds like you're saying there's been a shift sort of from the sort of almost anthropological, sociological kind of curiosity to the sort of more personal, direct connection. And do you feel as though students are sort of, because they're coming at it from I was a former client now, do you feel like they're more surprised by kind of like the shift of being trusted with those those dirty secrets, or do you feel as though they're more equipped because they themselves had so many and had that?
I think both. And I think that really comes down to resilience and just context and personal factors. I think for some students who are learning to be therapists, their personal experience makes them a fantastic therapist. They can handle it. They know what it feels like to be on now both sides, and that is incredibly fruitful and beneficial. For other students, it opens up Pandora's box, and that becomes challenging. Not that the challenge is bad, but it's a different path.
I love it. I love the neutrality that you're maintaining before everyone starts to vote on both sides of this debate. Let's talk a little bit about. I don't think I'm talking out of turn when I say a lot of concepts from the actual clinical field have become largely mainstreamed, right, within this generation. Like they're certainly talking about it a lot more. What do you see as the result of that? Do you think that it's a good thing that we're sort of starting to adopt that language in our sort of everyday speech, or does it feel as though that's having a negative impact? I mean, what do you see?
I think there's a real benefit to having language, access, information shared. Talking about mental health is really important. I think it destigmatizes mental health in some ways. Where I see that being often very problematic is we see an increase in mental health disorder. And I would argue there's a difference between I'm having a mental health experience or my mental health isn't great, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling stressed, compared to I have major depression, I have major depressive disorder, which greatly impacts functioning. Those are differences. And so I think my criticism of we're talking about it more and it's accessible is there's this like fine line of understanding the difference between an experience and disorder and what that means for treatment. The caveat being, I don't really care where you fall on the spectrum of I'm having a stressful moment to I have a full-blown disorder. If you need support, you need support, and you should be able to access it. That's a much larger issue, and I think that there's more of a benefit to that language being everywhere than it not being in terms of people getting access to what they need.
And so on the subject of access, I mean, this is another thing that I think we're going to end up talking about tonight. Do we feel as though this generation, as from the client side, has the kinds of access and resources that they need, or do we feel like those are getting scarce for whatever reason, whether it's because there are long lines of people who are now all seeking help at the same time, or whether it's, I mean, what do we see in terms of the amount of access and resources?
So the answer is no.
Okay, great. Wow, good. Flat,
no. There isn't enough access because there are barriers, financial barriers, there are barriers regarding stigma, cultural barriers, the types of support. So I'd be curious, and I won't do this because I'm not teaching all of you right now, but I would love to do that. How many of you know where to find a peer-driven program? How many of you know where to find a group counseling group? How many of you know where to find an individual therapist or a psychiatrist or an IOP? Do you even know what IOP means? How do you do that? And that to me is a problem. And so some people in this room probably know the answer to all of those areas that I just brought up, but I'm going to guess some of you don't, and that's totally cool and fine, but I don't want it to be that. I want people to know where to go. So if I do anything in my job, like long-term, big picture, the connector of services and then finding out how to bridge those barriers is probably the most important thing I do as a faculty member, as a practitioner who still practices, as somebody who works with stakeholders on a college campus, a big college campus, and somebody who has access to other community members and providers. But no, we have not done a great job with that. And I think that when we have more people seeking need, but we have not enough people to provide those services, and also I should say, not enough people who are getting paid well enough to provide those services long term, we have problems.
Yeah. I mean, I see that as a teacher as well.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about, and I don't know, I mean, you're not a sort of sociologist or historian, so I it's okay if you don't have like an answer in the back of your pocket, but In terms of like mental health trends, right? I mean, I think back to sort of like hypnotherapy being like pretty a sort of like popular trend in sort of like the late 1970s, 1980s, repressed memory stuff that sort of like that a lot of things that ended up kind of not only going out of fashion, but in some cases ended up being sort of proven to be quite regressive and actually sort of antithetical to what people were trying to do. If you had to name, can you like, is there a trend that you feel is going on right now in the sort of mental health community or the way that we talk about it in popular culture that you find to be that you might predict will look back on in the same way? Do you feel as though there's anything, or are you not allowed to say because?
I'm scared to give you an honest answer here. I think so, not quite to the extreme that you're talking about, where hypnosis or trying to encourage repressed memories is like a no-go. We don't really do it. Or psychoanalysis is very rare. Some people still pay for it, but we don't use it that often. I think the boom around trauma is going to pick up some of those themes. Now, I say that with the caveat that I believe firmly that what we know about trauma is so much better now than it even was when I was in grad school. And by the way, I'm not that old. So this wasn't that long ago. So that to me is a huge benefit. But the way I conceptualize that pragmatically and in my practice is that I don't like to label everything as traumatic. In fact, I would let my clients dictate that language if they chose to use it. But we have experiences that have weighty impacts. So again, I have students, former students in this room who've heard me say this, and I reference this all the time. We all have backpacks. And you have a backpack full of things. I always use the visual image of rocks or boulders or pebbles. And sometimes there is a boulder. And that boulder can stop you from moving. That boulder can slow you down. That boulder can make you want to change everything. That's an experience. I, as a therapist, won't just jump to trauma, but certainly it's falling into that arena compared to like the pebble experience, like somebody flipped you the bird. I don't know that that's really going to bother you that much. Maybe it did. That's okay. But I think how we understand people's experiences and how they shape them is different, and it really falls under that umbrella. So there's some really good things that are coming from that, but it also means we're looking at a ton of people who are using the label of trauma, which carries a lot of weight and a potential diagnosis and labeling that I think can be a little sticky and not necessarily beneficial.
Which kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about sort of the mainstreaming of very, very delicate kind of clinical language. And I think maybe the caveat that we could put in front of everything for tonight is that mental health is very important. Make sure that you take care of yourselves and that we're entering into all of these conversations in good faith, right? Okay, and the last thing that I think is always good to sort of end these conversations looking sort of forward. If you wanted to give sort of advice, I know it's hard to give advice to sort of like an entire room full of people, but in terms of sort of just like managing your own shit, like what would your advice be? Especially with a generation who has to tackle things like social media and technology in a way that we've never sort of seen before.
I mean, besides the fact that I would tell you to put your phone away, find a non-negotiable. And what I mean by that is we love terms like coping skills or breathing exercises. That's great. And yeah, sure, do it. A non-negotiable is something that you marry. It is yours and yours alone, and it can be anything. I run. I will wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning so I can go for a run. That is my non-negotiable. I don't always wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, but sometimes I do because I need that. That is my time. It clears my head. It allows me to refocus. It's mine. And I like to run alone. I don't like to run with people. It also gives me an opportunity to listen to awful trap music that my husband thinks is terrible, but I thoroughly enjoy. So a non-negotiable could be anything, really. And it should be adaptive in the sense that it's giving you something, not that it's taking away from you. That would be my biggest piece of advice. Because if I give you a list of coping skills, that's great, but I don't know that you're going to do any of them.
I think that, and I think that's a great way to put it. And I think that actually you managed to stick the landing on giving advice to everybody in the room. That was excellent. I literally married my non-negotiable. She's sitting right there. So thank you so much, Amanda, and I hope that you stick around to watch this excellent debate. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you so much. We are going to bring up behind me on this screen a QR code, and that's going to help you to vote initially on this question. Before you vote, I want to make clear that all of our debaters have decided that they are going to try and concentrate as much as possible not on comparing Generation Z to other generations, but to quite literally be asking, is Generation Z on the whole doing the right thing? Are the sort of the moves that Generation Z is making mental health wise going in the right direction? I think that they're going to be even clearer about exactly what they mean by this question. But I do want to make sure that you're not accidentally voting on the wrong question here. I don't want you to compare and contrast between Generation Z and other generations. We're really looking at them in isolation and looking at how it is that you all deal with this particular issue. So if you could vote right now, again, there is an option for undecided. If any of you are undecided and you're actually confused about what this particular question means, that's totally fine. So we're going to have a vote right now. And then we're going to have another vote at the end to find out where it is that everybody lands. The way that the debate is going to run is going to be in 3 rounds. We will have our affirmative and then our negative give an opening speech. That'll be 4 to 5 minutes each to give you a little idea of what their case means. After that, we're going to have a middle round where they're going to have a chance to address each other, answer each other's questions, answer my questions, and answer any of your questions that you might have. So hopefully you'll have some questions ready. And then they'll have our final round where in 2 to 3 minutes they'll make one last case for your vote, after which we'll take our final vote. And again, whoever ends up changing the audience's mind the most will be declared our winner. Those students from my class, make sure you pay close attention because this will help you with your papers, and also you'll be doing this yourselves for your third project. That said, let's open up the debate. And opening up the debate, answering yes to the question, is Generation Z the first generation to get mental health right? Whatever it is that we mean by that, we have Sohan.
Is this too loud? Or is this perfect? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sohan, and it's a pleasure to be here with y'all today. Before we begin our discussion on if Gen Z is the first generation to get mental health right, I would like to thank my partner, Connor, and my opponents, Desiree and Aaron, and our moderator, Ted, and everyone who showed up here today. So in regards to the audience, some of the information discussed here today about mental health may be sensitive to a select few. So at any time a topic is just too much, feel free to step outside. With that being said, let's begin. Mental health is not tied to one generation. So I want each of you to think about how you deal with your personal mental health. Do you deal with it similar to the person right next to you? Or do you have your own unique way of dealing with your own mental health? Think about your biggest stressors, whether it be your fitness, diet, school, or even your situationships. How do you deal with it? We often forget that we're living in the fastest, most evolving time in human history. In the last 3 years, we have seen drastic rise in social media and the negative implications that come with it. But what my partner and I have found so astonishing about our generation is that through all the FOMO, social isolation, and online negativity, Gen Z is finding new ways to cure their mental health. We have our own experience on how we solve or have solved our personal problems. So first, let me start with myself. Last year, I would have been sitting on the other side of the room. I thought depression was an excuse until I was on my 4th month of Accutane. And for y'all who are not aware of Accutane, it's an acne medication that lowers your serotonin and heightens your anxiety and depression. Now, I didn't really understand what was going on in my head at the time, but I do remember that it was hard for me to socialize and try new experiences, to be motivated. And it was not until I Googled my symptoms and scrolled through online forums and found people sharing their thoughts and feelings online that I was able to put a label on what was going on in my head. So now I want to stay away from words that are aimlessly coined with Gen Z, like soft, lazy, snowflake. We are the first generation to grow up with the internet. And we have access to unquantifiable amounts of information about mental health. Like everyone in this room, we saw the evolution of the iPhone. It started as a tool to help us navigate through the world, and now it's our life support. And due to this phenomenon, we do not have any more mental health challenges compared to previous generations. We just have a different set of mental health problems. And to help each of you understand better, let's establish what it means to get mental health right. First, we'll examine mental health being destigmatized by Gen Z. And next, we will see how Gen Z has adapted to mental health issues. And finally, we'll look into what professionals say about mental health, or about what Gen Z's mental health. So first, with destigmatization, when I say that, I'm referring to removing shame or disgrace. Do you in your individual life feel that you can talk to a friend about your mental health? And would they be willing to support you? According to research from Becker's Hospital in 2023, they found that Gen Z was more open about their mental health struggles. They also found that they're more likely to be open with a friend to share that they were going to therapy in the first place. Gen Z has created all these online safe spaces where people can communicate and learn from each other's experiences. We have also streamlined access to mental health resources, aiding in education about what mental health is in the first place. And despite being the ones of opening the doors of expression and connection, we get looked down for doing so. Have you ever felt that the older generation treats mental health as a societal taboo? I know that each of you in this room has heard someone criticize another for having mental health issues. And that is why I'm proud to say that Gen Z has made large contributions to destigmatizing mental health, especially in recent years. So next is adaptability. And this poses the question, given the societal norms that we have today, has Gen Z adapted mentally? For example, research done by Deloitte, and Deloitte's one of the biggest consulting firms in the world, actually. Gen Z is more likely to take mental health days and perform remote office work. We put the meaning behind the phrase, it's okay to not be okay. No one could have predicted the impact social media would have on our lives, but we have found ways to help our mental health despite being given a bad hand. Think about how some of you guys focus in the gym after a long, stressful day. Or maybe some of you guys have that face routine to build that consistency in your life. Or maybe you listen to those hundreds of thousands of podcasts that we see online of people sharing their experiences and thoughts. So finally, I would like to examine what mental health professionals say about Gen Z and mental health. Psychiatric websites like Verywell Mind and Therapist.com both relay that Gen Z is on the forefront of making it easier to talk about mental health. They also note that Gen Z normalizes conversation about mental health, and they're also prioritizing self-care. From their choices in the grocery store, health and well-being is on the top of our minds. In 2023, The Hill reported that almost half of Gen Zers surveyed that they go on walks and hikes to de-stress. And that also showed that 2 out of 5 of us actually go to therapy. And 53% have actually gotten help for mental health at some point. So from this evidence, we can see that Gen Z is coping with mental health struggles, but just in a different way. So we're not snowflakes, we're not soft. We were just the first generation to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And opening up the debate, answering no to the question, is Generation Z the first generation to get mental health right? We have Aaron.
Let me make sure this is all good. Can you all hear me? Perfect. As our opponents have mentioned, we are discussing a sensitive topic with content that may be triggering. Please be mindful of your own well-being while engaging with this content and reach out for help if needed. First of all, thank you to every one of you for coming here tonight so that we may discuss the important question, is Gen Z the first generation to get mental health right? We'd like to establish, like Ted said, that when we're referring to mental health, we are not talking about clinically diagnosed mental health disorders. Instead, we are discussing mental health in regards to an improved mental well-being, fostering a healthy environment, and a destigmatization of the topic. As Desiree and I began research on this topic, we were lost. We struggled to find an answer to this question, and obviously, there would not be a debate tonight if there was an easy answer to this question. This is an extremely complicated topic, and before we get started, we need to consider what we all should be voting on tonight. Whether or not Gen Z established working solutions that are viable in the long run to the conflicts that they experience within their mental health. Have we, as a generation, found actual solutions to our mental health? Our opponents bring up that we are a generation of open and acceptingness towards mental health. However, this blind openness has become another issue that we face on the journey towards getting mental health right. At times, Gen Z has become more accepting to a fault, leading us to amplifying symptoms and disorders rather than creating long-term results, like Dr. Tashjian mentioned earlier. One example of how Gen Z may carry on negative mental health effects is the misuse of clinical diagnosis terms. In the conversations surrounding mental health, semantics matter. And when we use terms like depressed in place of feeling low, we may not be really helping or bettering our own mental health. We need to look at whether or not solutions Gen Z has established are in line with those of the mental health community and value how these mechanisms are benefiting us in the long run, rather than allowing these effects to perpetuate mental health. One cause of these effects is the seeking of immediate solutions of mental stressors rather than professional treatment or other working solutions. Think about the time you've been stressed in school, and in an effort to reduce that stress, maybe you went on a run or spent time with friends, ultimately ending up only further procrastinating that work and snowballing your stress into a larger amount. These immediate solutions do little to solve the root causes of these mental health challenges that we all face. Even though Gen Z on the surface may appear accepting and more open to conversations around mental health, many barriers still exist in regards to the concepts of treatment. We have the goal of improving well-being, but a great number of us do not take the steps to obtain proper treatment, and when we do, we're met with even greater challenges. There aren't enough providers to meet existing needs and to ensure equitable access to treatment. And Gen Z is a huge generation, but the existing infrastructure and systems in place that we have do not have the capacity to handle our population size. Take, as an example, the size of Gen Z in college. Over 60% of Gen Z now pursue a 4-year degree. Our schools and institutions do not have the resources nor the capacity available to serve all of these needs for us. In addition to these issues of infrastructure, there's become a monopolization of mental health through wellness industries and social media, circumnavigating Gen Z to a path of unworkable short-term solutions. An example of this is the collaboration of insurance companies with tech companies. You may have heard of BetterHelp or Headspace, companies that seem to be always on the podcast that we all listen to with wellness in mind. In actuality, these companies have been revealed to be unethical and do not provide the treatment that necessitates mental health. The Federal Trade Commission found that BetterHealth had shared millions of customer-sensitive information with advertisers such as Facebook, Snapchat, Criteo, and Pinterest. This went against the company's privacy matters and promises. This is just another example of challenges that we must overcome to navigate our path to finding solutions for mental health issues. Gen Z is not to blame for these challenges, but we cannot say that Gen Z is the first generation to get mental health right when there is still so much to improve upon. It is for these reasons that my partner and I believe that Gen Z is not the first generation to get mental health right. Thank you.
Rarely happens, but I don't have any idea which side I'm leaning toward right now. So that was great. I'm excited to hear our arguments from both sides. I'm going to ask my first question over to the side answering yes, since the side answering no just spoke. So can we talk a little bit? I mean, it sounds like one of the things that your opponents are suggesting is that yes, there are mechanisms that Generation Z uses to kind of address their mental health, but a lot of them are short-term solutions rather than long-term solutions. Can you address that? I mean, would you agree with that, or do you think that there are better actual long-term solutions that this generation has come up with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are different aspects to this question. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I think there's two different aspects to this question. One is we need to be looking for the long-term solutions, but there's nothing wrong with seeking short-term solutions. I think breaking mental health down into bite-sized chunks, relieving your stress day to day, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, to their point of Gen Z relying on that maybe too much, I completely disagree. I think Gen Z has taken up stances with things like skincare routines, fitness, whether that be cooking, even crocheting is something that Gen Z has taken up as a long-term solution to these, maybe these smaller mental health problems.
Response?
Well, I think when Connor brings up kind of that notion of developing that skincare routine, and it develops and snowballing into a long-term routine, but we just don't really see that a lot happening with Gen Z. Think about the amount of times you've told yourself you're going to become a person who goes to a gym. You keep up with it for about a week, and then you lose sight of that habit. The thing is with Gen Z and being a college student is there's so much changing on a day-to-day basis that it's almost impossible to create that long-term routine that actually enables you to take care of your mental health.
Do you want me to talk?
Go for it.
So I want you to think of your mental health like a running faucet. Like, sure, you could leave the faucet running and go pound your day, or let me just move this right here. Or you can address it directly, and that's what we're trying to say. These smaller problems, they build up over time, and if our generation is just so good at tackling them that they don't elevate, so you don't go to like a breaking point.
I think what we're trying to say here is while these smaller problems can sometimes be, turned off with the faucet, as you're putting it, Sohan, it's sometimes difficult to do that. And I think a lot of times what we're saying is the institutions that we have in place aren't providing us the opportunity to be able to go and learn how to do those things or to work through them in general.
And I absolutely 100% agree with our opponents that infrastructure right now for mental health services, especially for Gen Z, are not at the rate that they should be for everyone's needs. However, this doesn't relate to how Gen Z as a generation deals with mental health. In fact, many of Gen Z is just now entering the workforce. And so we haven't been able to change that infrastructure yet. We're kind of just existing inside of it. So to that point, I would say that Gen Z is doing what they can with the infrastructure presented, and we can see those changes happening in the future.
I would like to ask, at this point in time in history, our infrastructure is like best up to date as well compared to previous generations as well.
But I still think that with that infrastructure argument you're talking about, there's still kind of that gap in language of what we use to talk about our mental health, right? So you still see a lot of people within Gen Z struggling with using the proper terminology to talk about their mental health. Like Dr. Tacha was talking about earlier, was how some people will say that they're that they're depressed, when in reality, or maybe they're feeling depressed, but don't technically have a clinically diagnosed disorder of depression. And so we see a lot of people in Gen Z struggling to have that language to even really communicate their mental health.
Yeah, can you guys address the issue of sort of self-diagnosis in the way that your opponents are talking about?
Absolutely, and I think this comes down to the idea of destigmatization versus a normalization or glamorization. So we all have to think about context when we're examining these situations like our opponents propose. So think about a friend saying something like, "I'm so anxious about my test coming up." That has a completely different connotation to Gen Z than someone saying, "I think I might need to get a diagnosis for general anxiety disorder." And so in order to destigmatize mental health, it sort of goes hand in hand with normalization. While we do agree that maybe these terms are overused, it is a part of destigmatization, which we would say is overall good. And we would say that Gen Z is so involved that they know the context of these situations. They know the difference between saying, maybe you're depressed for a short period of time versus a long form of depression.
So are you suggesting that, yes, sometimes these terms get normalized, but the long-term effect of destigmatization is sort of worth the small instances. Is that what kind of what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Great, yeah.
So we have a question actually for the negative really fast. Do you think that the normalization of like mental health and of these terms can lead to the desensitization of this topic? Yeah, for the affirmative, sorry.
So there's no way to really measure this longitudinally yet. And so there are some studies that suggest that actually the only time we really see glamorization or people not being sensitive to these issues is mostly online in smaller communities with much younger audiences. So this is sort of out of the scope of Gen Z and a lot of issues. I think a lot of Gen Z does take mental health very seriously, especially in our age range.
Well, Desiree, I'd also like to add too is, wouldn't you say that normalization would also influence destigmatization? Because if we're talking about it more, of course we're going to bring more attention to the problem in the first place.
Well, so to address on that first, Sohan, before I let Erin have share a point she has. So normalization and destigmatization, I would say that there's they're two separate things here. And you talk about how we've broken the stigma of mental health, but I would argue that we necessarily haven't done that yet. There's still, while you may feel comfortable talking to a close friend or family member about it, there's still a lot of people who struggle to talk to professors or their employers about it, which show that the stigma hasn't truly been broken. And Erin has something to say.
Yeah, and then even in those cases when we are comfortable to talk to your friends, I mean, like think about the time when you've been like, oh, I'm super stressed, I have all of these assignments. Desiree and I are going to the library after this. We talk about all of these experiences and mental health challenges that we're facing, and sometimes that can lead to issues of secondary trauma. When Desiree and I were doing our research, we learned about secondary trauma and how a lot of times when you're having these conversations, as members of Gen Z we can pass on some issues that can make others experience what we have been feeling ourselves. There's evidence to support that students are more likely to turn to their peers when experiencing mental health. And so we do agree with you guys on that. But what we're saying is that Gen Z is not doing it in a way that is beneficial for them and beneficial for battling mental health in the long run.
I would look to the fact that that is not a Gen Z exclusive issue. This is an issue that you can have with any form of mental health in any generation. And so I understand the point that you're getting at, that maybe our age range is more likely to talk to peers, and that can be detrimental to your peers, but I would say that can also exist in any generation outside of Gen Z.
Let's talk about a Gen Z exclusive issue, which is, as we talked about before, social media and technology. Obviously, other generations are using social media and technology, but Generation Z is the first generation of digital natives. Certainly, students who are in my class would know very much the sometimes addictive and purposely addictive properties of a lot of these apps. Can we talk a little bit about how it is that social media and technology enters into this conversation, and how it is that it particularly affects Generation Z? And you guys can start.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, as we're all agreeing here today, Gen Z is more open and accepting to talking about mental health. We can see that on social media, whether you're on TikTok or Instagram or another kind of social media like Snapchat. You're seeing that we're all more welcoming to talking about social media, yes. But the issues at hand is that there comes a time when we start to desensitize to these topics, and we also lose sight of what we're trying to work through. A lot of times it can be difficult to accept that we need to take the next steps to be able to battle through these challenges. And with TikTok or social media like Instagram, it can be difficult to find ways to do that because a lot of times we're listening to uninformed sources or uninformed, influencers rather than professionals and clinical help.
And I would absolutely be the first one to say that social media is a give and a take. Maybe sometimes it's more of a take than a give. And that's just from my own personal experience. But what we have to think about is, what are the issues that Gen Z specifically is facing related to social media? So a lot of people would say this might be something like isolation. This is an issue that a lot of other generations haven't experienced, but there's online communities. There's relatability down to the very minute details of what you're experiencing. There's anonymous groups where you can speak your mind, you can get your feelings out without having any impacts in your day-to-day lives. And so we think in terms of mental health, Gen Z knows social media better than anybody without a doubt, and we know how to use it specifically for mental health.
I would also like to add is that there's also more awareness around the world of what is going on. Think about it, and this is from Pew Research. In the last 30 years, we are in the age of just getting so much information right when we wake up. Like, think about it. would that not drive anyone mad?
So first, before I talk about that, I kind of want to touch on what Connor was talking about when he brought up social media being a good thing because it can help prevent isolation by being able to interact with other people. I would say that this opens up the door to a lot of negative things also. You see on social media cyberbullying that was really huge throughout our generation, right? You see people using social media not only to uplift other people, but to tear down a lot of people as well. And so that also just contributes and worsens a person's mental health.
And that is an absolutely valid point. I myself do not have an answer for cyberbullying, and I can't really explain what that has done to Gen Z's mental health. What we can talk about is, that is an experience that a lot of Gen Z has had exclusively as a generation. But on the other side of that, what are solutions that Gen Z has found through social media or just through this sort of mass media movement, whether that be, binge watching TV shows, going e-shopping, or just scrolling on your phone. Those are ways that Gen Z has been able to utilize this tool that may be harmful, but also use it as a way to de-stress. And so we see the negatives, but we'd also argue that there are definitely positives that Gen Z sees.
So Desiree, I actually have an answer to your question. So you said cyberbullying is new, and then also FOMO. But wouldn't you agree that that's what sets our mental health problems apart from previous generations? That's what gives us a different set.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that has a negative effect on the mental health of people within our generation.
But how are we going to compare from previous generations?
Well, this is what we talked about earlier, is we're not necessarily trying to compare between generations here because that would be like comparing trauma of different levels. Mental health isn't necessarily this new concept, but we're looking at Gen Z specifically and how they handle mental health.
How are you measuring that?
How are we measuring how Gen Z measures mental health?
No, how are you measuring the destigmatization? Because you're saying it's down from what if we're not allowed to compare from previous generations?
I don't believe we said that the destigmatization was down at all at any point of today's debate.
We're saying that the stigma still exists in today's society.
I think what we can all agree on here is that Gen Z may be harmed by social media, but there's also a lot of ways that they can also benefit from it. I'm not going to argue and say that Gen Z has benefited from cyberbullying. I'm sure that they'll agree that there are aspects of social media that Gen Z has found to be helpful. But I think in terms of mental health, I think Gen Z has sort of taken this new landscape and claimed it and used it to their advantage. And that's what we would say one of our main points is.
I want to ask, one more question, and then we're going to get to audience questions. So have some questions ready, everybody. We're talking a lot about cyberbullying. This will be connected, so if you had something else to say, you can certainly come back to it. We're talking a lot about cyberbullying. I actually am genuinely curious because I think I probably had a very different experience in middle school and high school than you all did, which is bullying. And obviously, I think there are a lot of anti-bullying sort of campaigns that are happening in schools that weren't around in previous generations. So can we talk a little bit about that? Obviously, that's a result of schools themselves sort of paying closer attention to students' mental well-being. Again, do we feel as though those anti-bullying campaigns are actually sort of helping students, or do we feel that they are, just schools kind of putting a Band-Aid on something that isn't necessarily helping overall? And you guys can start.
Yeah, I don't know how much I can attribute to school campaigns because, we all saw how DARE performed. What I would say, though, is that it's what Congress is doing in the social media landscape. And so when we were growing up, it was sort of like the new frontier. It was almost unregulated. So I would say that, there's much more laws that are being brought to Congress, that are being voted on, that are being enacted that have to do with specifically younger generations on social media. And so I would say that's where we can see success. And that was a unique issue that Gen Z experienced, and we're hoping to resolve that.
I think kind of to add on to that, something that we talked about early in our openings and something that we all have agreed on here today is that the infrastructure is lacking regardless, whether you're talking about anti-bullying programs or even mental health abilities for people to be able to visit on campus here. It's almost like this action of putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, and we're not able to fix it because we don't have the infrastructure to do so. And as we've been saying time and time again tonight, Gen Z might have the possibility of doing that, but we don't think they have yet, and that's why we do not believe Gen Z has gotten mental health right today.
But are you two suggesting that Generation Z is, if we were to say the word Generation Z one more time in this debate, we could play a drinking game to this. But if are you suggesting that Generation Z is not demanding the right things from that infrastructure? In other words, are they asking those sort of institutions for the right kind of solutions, or are you suggesting that they are demanding the wrong things, and that even if that infrastructure and that the resources were there, that Gen Z is actually not demanding the right things? Which one are you guys sort of suggesting here?
Well, I think it's a delicate balance to kind of look at. I think a lot of times Gen Z is trying to demand the correct things in some ways, but also at the same time, there still is a lot of misinformation. And a lot of times when we get our sources from things like TikTok or other social media trends, it's difficult to discern which is valid and which is not. And that's why time and time again, we would say to go back to mental health professionals and compare this to what the mental health professionals are saying themselves.
Great. So again, then can I get to?
Well, I just had like a quick question. Where is the infrastructure being bad at? Online or in person for mental health?
I would say it's almost everywhere. A lot of places, it's difficult to find ways to mitigate the challenges that we face with mental health. I mean, if you look at U of A or, other colleges, a lot of times it's difficult for us to be able to access those programs and whatnot.
Well, so we can also just say that there's been exponential growth in online forums where people can just talk about their feelings online and they can share, and it's free. So there is an infrastructure online.
Well, so there's a difference between sharing online with anyone in general, and there's a difference between sharing with a trained professional like a counselor or a therapist. Counselors and therapists go through years of trainings, while online forums and friends and family may offer valuable advice. A therapist's knowledge offers clinical research and based on approaches, and we go through extensive training. So these therapists are able to offer a safe, judgment-free space to identify rational patterns and to gain insight into behavior and to address kind of the root causes rather than to just share whatever you're thinking.
And just to add on to that really quick, like Dr. Tashjian said at the beginning of tonight's event, she was talking about how a lot of times whenever young graduates are entering the counseling and mental health profession, they don't realize how difficult it is to take on that job. So why are we leaving it to other individuals who may not have the experience or capabilities of doing so because they don't have the professional experience of being a mental health counselor or therapist?
Great, thank you. Let's get some questions from the audience. And if any of you are tired of hearing or saying Gen Z, it sounds like we're largely talking about college students. So you could always substitute the phrase to stuck college students in for Generation Z if you feel like you're getting exasperated by it. But yeah, let's get some questions from the audience. Yeah, great, please.
So this question is for the affirmative and goes back to the stigma argument. So I have diagnosed major clinical depression, and I think one issue that may have caused that was a lot of the stigma for men and boys on getting help and acknowledging that they have an issue, that like toxic masculinity, that patriarchy, and I think that still very much lingers with Gen Z today, and you see that in disproportionately low numbers of men and boys getting help. So in what sense have men and boys gotten it right, or is there like an argument supporting that?
Very quickly before you answer, I'm going to just repeat it into the mic for the cameras, just because people might not have heard your question. The question here is there, has Gen Z gotten any better at the sort of gender divide and the stigma against sort of men and boys seeking help, or has it pretty much sort of remained the same, I think is more or less what you're asking. Great.
I would say that it absolutely has improved, and when we're looking at the stigma from our experience growing up, a lot of that is sort of trickling down through the older generations and the stigmas that they're holding. And so your ability to be able to talk about that in such an open setting, I think, is a great example of the destigmatization, and I commend you for that. And I think these are the conversations that are aiding in destigmatizing. Is our generation is open, and I am so proud of us for being that. And I think that as we continue growing up and we take over more of society in terms of population, we're going to really see these benefits come to fruition.
Respond?
I think it's just kind of a clarification point to add on to this, because that was a really good question. When we talk about having an openness to conversations, it's not the same as like fully destigmatizing the topic. Just because there's a few people who are okay with having maybe a conversation with a close friend or a family member, doesn't mean that society as a whole has been able to reach a destigmatization. We haven't gotten there yet.
Great. Yeah, let's get another question from the audience. Yeah, great. Oh, please.
Yeah, I just actually wanted to get your response to just tacking into that last question. Incel culture has become larger and more violent throughout the course of Gen Z, leading to things like mass shootings. And I just saw a study about a week and a half ago stating that there's starting to be gender divide where Gen Z, and now I guess we're calling them Gen A, men are like trending to be more conservative in their views and more patriarchal in their views, and women are tending to be more liberal and less patriarchal in their views. And that's manifesting itself in ways like, I mean, the obvious stuff like incel stuff, and also lower marriage rates, lower success with dating, and things like that. So how do you square these trends coming from the UN and your stance?
And luckily, our interlocutor is our cameraman, so you could tell me you're close enough to the camera that I don't have to repeat that question, right? Okay, great. Yeah, good.
That is definitely a tough question to answer because, we're coming up here and we're talking about all of the benefits that social media can provide, and they are absolutely those negatives, and they are harsh reality, and it's a harsh reality and it's harsh negatives. So I can't say that I have a definitive answer on how mental health is trending in that direction. But Sohan can add something.
Yeah, so I think social media is unique. What we see on social media is a fragment of reality. Be honest, because what ends up happening is you have 10% of individuals online, and what they do is they polarize their views to get more followers, more engagement in their content. So what you're seeing online may not be necessarily true than what we see in reality.
But marriage rates are falling, and dating satisfaction is going down. Those things are outside of social media.
I would argue in the scope of Gen Z that a lot of this is infrastructure and societal norms that we have not yet had the full impact on society to be able to deal with. And so I think we've sort of been handed down some of these instances, and we are hoping, to take them, we're going to improve those rates and destigmatize further.
Yeah, so to add on to that, first off, thank you for that excellent question because we agree with you. We think that Gen Z, and Connor seems to agree with us as well, hasn't had the ability yet to change that infrastructure, and that's what we're arguing for today. We're not saying that Gen Z can't get it right, with mental health, but what we're saying is as of right now, they haven't yet done so. Obviously, every single one of us in the room today have the ability to change the world. That's something that we're always told from little kids to now. And I think that that's something that we're even, kind of reiterating again tonight, is the fact that we haven't had the chance to do so yet as a generation, and because of that, we don't believe that Gen Z has gotten mental health right yet.
I don't know that when I was a kid, I was told that I had the ability to change the world. I think that's certainly something that's changed. So good. That's great. We have, I think, time for one more audience question before we get to our closing statements. So yeah, please. Okay.
Here, I wrote this down. So I just heard a lot of stats and points and stuff like that didn't seem very specific to Gen Z, as in stuff 2 out of 5 people in Gen Z seek therapy and stuff like that. But it's very dependent on geographical location, for instance, the infrastructure point, the infrastructure in Norway for students is totally different than in the United States. So when we're asking the question of if Gen Z is the first to get mental health right, it seems hard to answer unless we clarify where we're speaking from. Are we just talking about the United States here?
No, this is great. Yeah, let's just again to repeat the question. I think that the question here is there a sort of geographical component here where, especially because Generation Z is such a global generation, can we really truly sort of generalize across the globe, or are we sort of centralizing what we're talking about to the United States?
I can say that we are definitely focusing more in on the United States. A lot of our statistics are based in the United States, and we're sort of taking the view that people in the Gen Z age range are entering the college stage of life, which is very North American centric. So I would say we're definitely taking that scope, but even in that, geographically across the United States, there's rural areas, there's, city infrastructure, and I would say that Gen Z has done a great job staying connected, and even in those means varying geographically across the United States.
Sort of, you're suggesting they're sort of blurring a lot of those lines in a way that we haven't seen before. Yeah, great.
I think mostly the same for us. Whenever we were finding our research and seeing where the research studies were done, it's mostly in the U.S., but you bring up an excellent point with the examples of Norway and other places.
But do you suggest that even when concentrating on the U.S., that you're still firm on your side that the answer is no.
Still do not believe that Gen Z has gotten mental health right, even if that's just in the United States.
I do want to make sure that our debaters are still saying yes and no to these questions. Sorry, was I yours?
I was just going to reply to that saying, like, would you agree with that maybe in some country with a bit more infrastructure, like Norway, or maybe somewhere in that sort of realm of European countries?
We haven't done enough research to be able to fully comment on that, so I don't want to say yes or no directly to that. But in the realm of the research that we have done, we do not believe that Gen Z has gotten mental health right yet.
It is 8, so I think we might have one if we have a terse, very quick question, we have time for one more question, and then we have our 2-minute closing statements. Yeah, great, please.
Do you guys think, this one's not for either side,
Great.
but it's me to answer. Do you guys think that you see more of Gen Z looking diverse in the area of mental health? Right now, I'm in a class that's kind of talking about all of this, and racial battle fatigue is something that I've been very fascinated by. I think that that's where most of my anxiety comes from as an African American woman in the U.S. So do you think that there needs to be like finer defining lines in sort of that vocabulary when dealing with individuals who are people of color who deal with mental health issues? And how would you go about?
Great, yeah. How does racial diversity sort of enter into this conversation? I think that's a great question. Yeah, let's start with you guys.
Do you want me to? Okay. So thank you for that great question. I think that was something we talked about in our opening, especially, and something that we always reiterated from Dr. Tashjian is that the semantics of this do matter, and we think that Gen Z hasn't made those clear distinctions just yet, but also we think it's of utmost importance that we do, and we have the potential to. So to answer your question shortly, we totally need to, and we can, but we have not yet fully.
Yeah, we can also say mental health is it depends on where the region you are in the United States and the demographic. And what we'd like to highlight with Gen Z is that we have really diverse friend groups, and we're able to hear from new perspectives and understand, because our mental health is unique to us. It is. And what's unique about our generation is we're able to talk to people because we're more diverse. We're less racist compared to the previous generation. We're just diverse.
All right, great. Let's go ahead and move to our closing statements. And again, we're going to hear very short 2 to 3 minute closing statements, and then you guys will all have a chance to vote a second time to let us know where it is that you land, and then we will announce our winners. That said, closing down the debate on the side answering yes to the question, is Generation Z the first generation to get mental health right? We have Connor.
It is once again my pleasure to be with you here today. I would like to thank my partner Sohan, my opponents Aaron and Desiree, our moderator, the UA debate series, and our audience. Thank you for letting us have this important conversation on Gen Z and mental health. I want you to think about how you deal with any mental health issues you may have. Do you respond similarly to your friends? Or do you each have your own ways that you respond? I want you to imagine a long, stressful day at school. How would you respond to it? We all have a friend who might binge watch. Maybe we have one who plays video games, or maybe we have one who browses the internet for new clothing. These are not escapism mechanisms. These are not signals of the weak. These are coping mechanisms specific to Gen Z. And this is what I find so intriguing about Gen Z's mental health. We all have our own experience, our tailored way of dealing with stress. We don't think about life the same way that other generations do. I want you to think back to your personal response. How do you deal with these mental health challenges? This is the point that I am expressing. Gen Z is a very unique generation. I think we can all agree on that. We have our own set of challenges. We think about life in our own way that other generations just do not understand. We speak the unique language that only Gen Z gets. However, we face a lot of scrutiny from outside sources. They call us the special snowflakes, often described as sensitive, lazy, unmotivated. We are told we're the bed rotters, the quiet quitters, the job hoppers, and the expectant. But look around. Think of your friends. Think of who you are. Is your first thought of laziness or entitlement? When I think of my friends, I think of a resilient generation. We have endured endless challenges. My friends ask for help when they need it. They aren't embarrassed to need help, and they find ways to manage stress that society imposes on them. I am proud to be a member of Gen Z, in our digital frontier. We have unity in our experience, and although I will say that we are not perfect, I am confident to say that we have done a pretty good job at getting mental health right. We are the generation who coined the term, "It's okay to not be okay." Thank you.
Thank you, Connor. And closing out not only the negative side of this resolution, but also the entire debate itself, we have Desiree.
My partner Aaron and I would like to thank our opponents, audience, and moderator for your time today. Thank you for giving us your time in this debate so that way we may have a thoughtful conversation about whether or not Gen Z is the first generation to get mental health right. Most of us in this room right now are college students, and I would be willing to bet we all have what feels like a million papers, assignments, quizzes, and exams due this week. In addition to work and clubs and all the other stressors of life. What do you do to cope with the stress? You turn to your friends and confide in them and tell them how stressed, exhausted, and burned out you are. They will commiserate with you and admit they're feeling the same way. You'll tell yourself if you take a quick break, you'll be ready to dive back into your work. Maybe you grab a sweet treat, turn on an episode of your favorite show, head to the gym, or open social media on your phone and start to scroll. 10 minutes pass by, then 20 and 30 minutes, and before you know it, 1 to 2 hours have passed. You feel a little relieved in the moment, but by the next morning, you're stressed and exhausted again with a million things left to do. But at the end of the day, we all have to ask ourselves, what does Gen Z do that helps our mental health in the long run? While Gen Z may be more open to conversations about mental health, are we having the right conversations? There's been a lot of back and forth and questions asked by the audience throughout this debate, so I want to clarify the main points. First, we've talked a lot about social media and technology, and I think we can all agree that this is something very unique to Gen Z. But I want to tell you is that while we may have access to more information, it's not always the right information. We see a lot of misinformation spread on social media, and it's hard to discern what we should be actually doing in our mental health in terms of what health professionals want. Additionally, we've seen cyberbullying be huge as a part of social media. They talk about how scrolling and being on part of social media can help you relieve your mindset for a little bit, take that quick brain break. But what has it really done? Did you do anything to address the root cause of your stress or to help your mental health in the long run? The second main point we've talked a lot about today and even had several audience questions about is the stigmatization behind mental health. The affirmatives tried to tell you that that stigma's been broken, but unfortunately, it still exists in today's society. You may feel comfortable now opening up with your friends or your parents about your mental health, but do you feel comfortable telling your professor, telling your employer, or telling a stranger that you've only known for 30 seconds? The stigma still exists, and we need to make sure that we're taking steps in order to improve it in the future. But Gen Z just hasn't had the time yet to do so because we lack that infrastructure to do so. We talked about in our opening speech about how we have this lack of infrastructure to access mental health. The affirmatives tried to tell you that Gen Z demands this by using online social media platforms and the internet to help this. But have we ever really seen a true impact by this? Universities don't have the capacity to deal with their students' mental health. There's not enough counselors out there to deal with to help every person within Gen Z. It's because my partner and I believe in Gen Z, and we know they have the potential to improve, the capacity to expect more than what we're working with now, that we say Gen Z has not gotten mental health right. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. All right, now everybody gets to decide who it is that our winner is. Our second QR code is right behind me. So go ahead and submit your votes. Let's see how it is that the votes changed. Please vote now. As you're voting, Riley's going to tally everything up and let us know where it is that you all land. In the meantime, what I want to do is just make a few announcements. First of all, for those of you who don't know, we are the University of Arizona Debate Series. A really sad thing that's happening this year is like 90% of our super awesome interns are graduating. So anybody who's interested in coming to do a 4-credit internship for us, come up and talk to any of our awesome interns, and they will let you know what it is that you can do. We have marketing, we have events planning, we have research, we have graphic design, we have all kinds of really cool positions if you're interested in something like that. And they'll be open next year. I also want to announce that we will be competing in the Arizona Regents Cup on March 23rd. Hopefully we're going to kick the ass of the other schools, even though it's supposed to be a friendly competition. Not this year. We're very competitive. We'll be up at ASU. That's something also that happens every year. You're more than welcome to apply for that. The winners, the top students, get $15,000 each. So that should turn a few heads, I would imagine. And everybody who participates gets $500. So I hope that that is something that entices you. And those applications will open up at the end of the summer for next year. Again, you can come up and talk to any of our interns or me, the executive director of the University of Arizona Debate Series, Ted McLoof, whenever you are curious right after we're done here. That said, the votes are in, and now I can officially tell you who the winner of tonight's debate is. Means that they are our winners, so congratulations. All right, and that said, let's go. Come on up and ask these people whatever questions you want to, but otherwise, thank you. You were an excellent crowd. It was really, really awesome to have everybody here. Thank you again to Dr. Amanda Tashjian for being our excellent opening speaker. We hope to see you at our future events.
I wrote that wrong.
Yeah, I figured.